Cool. So today's game plan, we're going to get into pH, electrolyte, and fluid balance. It's basically 3 sub-lectures all together. The whole theme here is just balance. Okay, so we'll take breaks in between here. Okay. We're going to start off with the simplest one here and start with just fluid balance. Okay. So total body water, give or take, is about 60%. You don't have to memorize that 60%. It's not a hard, fast number. What would be something that decreases your total body's water? Dehydration, drinking coffee, drinking beer, etc. Okay. Or if you drink too much water, it's going to increase it. So that's what I'm saying. Don't be too hard and fast on that 60. Okay. Now there's 2 ways to store water in the body. We have intracellularly and extracellularly. So intracellular, where are we storing the water? Perfect. Okay. In fact, that accounts for 2/3 of your total body's water. Okay. That accounts for 2/3 of your total body's water. So i.e., the main way we store water inside our cells. Okay. The second way we store water is extracellularly. So just the opposite. Okay. Just give or take about 1/3. 2 ways to store it. So I'm going to think of 2A, 2B here. Interstitial. When you see the term interstitial, that means in between. Interstitial means in between, so in between the cells. Intravascular. Be careful with this one. What does intravascular mean? Inside the vessels, yeah. So blood, I heard, was an example. Okay, be careful here. Intravascular is not the same thing as intracellular. Okay. As nurses, which fluid compartment are you only looking at exclusively? Intra or extracellular? So think about this. How would you look inside the water of a cell? You're gonna have to take a needle, stab a cell, suck up the water, stab another cell, suck up that water millions of times before you get enough water. Is that feasible? No. You guys as nurses are living here. You only will be working with extracellular fluid. You will only be looking at fluid outside of your cells. Case in point, intravascular, blood. Okay, what I'm saying here, be careful. Intravascular does not mean intracellular. Is your blood inside your cells? No, blood is not inside the cells, it's outside of the cells. Okay, really, the intracellular, that's just research. So you guys aren't going to go there. Okay. Sorry, I just want to make sure I'm not, yeah, good. Okay. So this is kind of standard, right? You got to maintain everything within a narrow range, else you die. Cool. All right, so just a little brief overview. Okay. These are your minerals. This is the elemental abbreviation. Yes, you need to know your elemental abbreviations. A, because I'm lazy. B, in the medical field, this is how you're going to see sodium. Okay, so expect that on your quizzes, your exams. I won't really write it out. It's the primary ECF, extracellular fluid cation. Okay, i.e., most of your sodium should be outside of your cell. Most sodium is outside the cell. We'll talk about how it regulates osmotic forces. Cool. Chloride is the primary ECF. So where do we find the majority of chloride in the body? Extracellular or outside of the cells, like in your blood. Okay. What you need to know about chloride is that chloride follows sodium. Okay. Chloride follows sodium. What I mean by this, wherever there's sodium, there's chloride. So if a patient has a lot of sodium in their urine, what else do they probably have? Okay, if a patient has low sodium, what else are they probably low in? Whatever's going on with sodium, same thing's happening with chloride. Okay. All right. So when it comes to fluid balance, this is the law. Box it, underline it, highlight it, frame it, get it stitched. Oh, this is going to be something that carries with us throughout the entire quarter and into your final. Yes, there's questions on your final about this. Sounds really simple. Water follows sodium, right? My brain doesn't work that way. Personally, the way I think of it, so that's 4. I think of sodium pulls water. Bless you. Sodium pulls water. Wherever there's sodium, it pulls water towards it. So if I have a lot of sodium in my urine, a lot of sodium in my pee, what's going to happen? I'm going to pull more water from my blood into my urine. If I have a lot of sodium in my blood, I'm going to pull water out of the urine, put it back into the blood. Okay, we're going to practice this here a little bit. Sounds easy, it's a little bit more complicated. This brings up the idea of tonicity. Tonicity is just another term for concentration. Okay.
What about like the whole osmotic force term? Do we need to know that?
We'll get to it, I promise. Okay, so practicing with tonicity, so different concentrations. First up, we have isotonic. What does iso mean? Like an isometric contraction? Equal, yeah, and tonic is concentration. Equal concentration. Okay, the human body sits at 0.9% sodium chloride. That's the amount of sodium in your blood right now. Okay, so if I have a cell, okay, there's a cell, and we'll use green for the sodium. Let's say there are 9 dots of sodium inside the cell. When we provide an isotonic solution, we're providing water into the veins, and we talked about that's outside of the cells, right? So if I'm providing an isotonic solution, I'm providing a solution with the same concentration of sodium. So 9 dots here, 9 dots here. Iso equal, okay? That means if one of these sodium molecules pulls a water molecule into the cell, the outside sodium will pull water out of the cell. It's this idea of equal exchange. You got 9 people on this side of the rope, 9 people on that side of the rope. They're playing tug of war. There will be no change in cells. 0.9 sodium chloride in the clinical field is just normal saline. What do we use normal saline for? To flush IVs. Awesome. Reconstitute drugs. Give somebody more blood volume. Okay, it's great for hydration, especially if you're hungover. You guys ever hear of nursing knitting circles? Okay, nursing knitting circles is when you guys all have a bunch of expired saline. It's just salt water. It's not going to go bad. Sit in a circle and you practice IVs on one another. Everyone has a little IV bag going in of saline. Great for hangovers. Whatever you're doing the night before is you. Okay. Hypertonic. So what kind of concentration am I giving a person if I give them a hypertonic solution? Am I giving them something that's more salty or less salty? Okay, so our cell concentration still stays the same. That is unchanging. Still 9 dots. Okay. Now I'm going to draw more salt on the outside. Okay. Who's going to win the tug of war here? The cell or the blood? Blood. So where will water want to go? Water follows sodium. Water follows sodium. Again, in my mind, I think of this sodium here reaching inside the cell and pulling the water out. So all the water is going to leave my cell, and that's going to cause my cell to shrink. We call that intracellular dehydration. Intracellular dehydration. Okay. Hypotonic, what kind of solution am I giving a patient? More water, less salt, perfect. So where does water want to go if I give the patient a hypotonic solution? Into the cell. Okay, your cells will swell. So why would we ever give a hypertonic solution? Why would we ever want to shrink somebody's cells? Don't think about it too hard. Why do we want to shrink somebody's cells? What's wrong with them?
They don't too much or nice.
Maybe they're too big. Maybe this person's cells are very bloated. Maybe they have fluid overload. Maybe they have too much water. We can provide this solution to help pull the water out of the cells. Okay. Why would we ever give somebody a hypotonic solution? Sorry? To rehydrate. To rehydrate. Okay. So those are just two examples there. We'll practice a little bit more with this, but do you understand the idea of how salt pulls water or water follows sodium? Okay, so sodium, as we mentioned, the majority of it is extracellular. It's outside of your cells. These ranges right here, I will not test you on. You will need to know these in foundations though. Okay, so for me, we're cool right now. We're good, but these will come back up again in foundations. Okay, and med search 1 and farm. Not my class. Every other class besides me and Lindsay's, this comes back up. Okay. So let's talk a little bit about hypernatremia. Okay. On this exam, the wording here is going to be very, very, not tricky, but I would say detail orientated. Hyper means elevated. Emia refers to in blood. What does this person have elevated levels of in their blood? This is why you need to know the elemental form. That's sodium. Okay, so you can see hypernatremia, hyponatremia, hyperkalemia, hypercalcemia. We're going through the electrolytes. Pay attention, read closely on your exams. Hyper, hypo, what electrolyte? Okay. So hypernatremia means, well, elevated sodium in the blood, of course, or not enough water. Not enough water. If I am dehydrated, do I have more or less water in my blood? Less. So what happens to the concentration of sodium? What happens to the concentration of sodium if I have less water? Think about like a beaker. If you take a scoop out of seawater, you start boiling off that water. Does that water get more salty or less salty? More salty. So less water means higher concentrations. Okay, so hypernatremia comes from two ways. A, I eat too many Big Macs. B, I don't drink enough water. Both of those would result in dehydration. Agreed? Basically, it would lead to dehydration. Okay, why? Why would it lead to dehydration? Where is all of the water going during hypernatremia? Ooh. All of the water is leaving my cell. So would that lead to dehydration? Yes, and we call that intracellular dehydration. Ta-da! Right at the bottom there, sorry. Okay. So it's just this point right here, water movement goes from the internal to the external, what we just drew, internal to the external, internal to the external. Okay. The from bits, I will not test you on yet. We will get to it in exam 5. What I am more concerned with right now, do you know what hypernatremia is? Do you know where water is going? Okay. Manifestations, signs, symptoms, increased functions of the nervous system. Okay, so think about your nervous system being overactive. We're going to see convulsions, seizures, thirst. You're going to become thirsty. 1 Y, not 3. Don't even worry about it. Okay, why? Thirst is a vital reflex. Thirst is a vital reflex. What should happen to your vital reflexes if you are dehydrated? Increased functions. What happens to your vital reflexes during hypernatremia? Same way, yeah, it increases. Same question, just asked 2 different ways. Okay. The other one I want you guys to worry about is, of course, hypertension makes sense. If I eat too many Big Macs, increase my blood pressure. Yes, yes. So this is when I'm just eating way too much salt in my diet. That's why I'm saying like it hasn't quite led to dehydration. We're on our way to dehydration because it's going to be a spectrum, right? And then hyperreflexia, elevated reflexes. So if I eat enough Big Macs, can I catch a bullet? I'm not going to try it.
You're just gonna kick your dog.
Be careful. Reflexia, these are reflexes, not reaction time. Not reaction time. So you might see hyperreflexia with cloneness. Okay, so how, as a nurse, would you assess somebody's reflexes? Yeah, you smack the knee. What should happen when you smack the knee? Kicks. Hyperreflexia, that leg kicks higher. Okay, that leg kicks higher. Clonus is when the leg rings. So you smack the patellar tendon, normally it kicks out maybe there. You smack it again, it kicks out higher. As it comes back, it starts ringing. This clonus is ringing. That is a sign of hypernatremia. Okay. So I'm just writing ringing. Okay. So on the other side here, hyponatremia, low sodium in the blood. Where's all the water moving in hyponatremia? Into the cell. I agree. From the extracellular to the intracellular. What causes hyponatremia, low sodium, or too much water? We'll investigate this here a little bit. Okay. Again, I'm not really going to ask you about the from here. Kids are really, if just an FYI, kids are really at risk if they've been vomiting or having diarrhea for a week, couple of weeks. They've lost so much water. They've also lost all of their electrolytes. So just heads up when you travel with kids to the tropics. Hypernatremia increased your nervous system functions. So what do you expect hyponatremia to do? Okay. Decreased functions of the nervous system. So we will see lethargy. We will see depressed reflexes. In medical terms, how would you describe depressed reflexes? Hyporeflexia. So you smack somebody's patellar tendon, what's going to happen? Depressed reflexes, nothing. This is kind of an interesting one. You'll see hypotension. How is it that someone drinks so much water that their blood pressure drops? All of the water from their blood is going where? Inside of the cells. That's why their blood pressure drops. Decreased urine output. That's weird. If I asked you to drink 5 liters of water, so 4 of those bad boys. Anybody want to pee? Yes, yeah, right. You guys want to pee? But if you drink too much water, you stop peeing. That's weird. Who tells your bladder that we need to pee? What organ? Sorry. Your brain tells you that you need to pee, right? And what happens to the brain with hyponatremia? Decreased vital reflexes. Okay, so a little bit of a little case study here. What I recommend to kind of help you guys out with, because there's not great video for electrolytes, but there's a really good case study I'll summarize here. You go on YouTube. You want to look up a channel called Chubby Emu. One word, Chubby Emu. One word. And the video is titled Mom Drank 3 gallons of water. This is an interesting case study. He actually modifies it. I really like his channel. If you're trying to look for ways to turn off your brain while you study this, but look for context, he has a lot of different case studies. Take for examples, what happens when you eat a Tide Pod? What happens if you eat 23 brownies filled with laxatives? Pretty good case studies, but this one here actually happened out in California. Do I got any Californians?
Is it the woman who's trying to win like a video game console for her son?
There was a contest that a radio held called Hold Your Wii for a Wii. You guys remember the Nintendo Wii?
Yeah.
That thing was hot. I think it was real hot. So everybody shows up. Rules are you drink 2 gallons or 3 gallons of water. Last one to pee wins a Nintendo Wii. Everyone starts drinking their water. People start dropping off, having to go urinate. The winner was this mother of, I believe, 2 children. After she won, she went to go collect her prize. She noticed she didn't need to pee anymore. She was feeling a little lethargic, a little out of it, a little dazed. Collects the Nintendo Wii. Husband goes to pick her up. She starts complaining of a migraine. This is the worst headache she's ever felt in her entire life. Husband says, okay, you've been through an ordeal. You just drank 3 gallons of water. You haven't even peed yet. Maybe you just need to sleep it off. She goes home. She goes to take a nap. Dad picks up the kids, makes dinner, plays with the kids on the new video game console, buys her some time. About 8 hours goes by and she hasn't woken up yet. Husband goes in to check on the wife. She's in the middle of her, I think, 8th seizure on the floor. Calls 911. She is dead before she gets to the hospital. Yes, this radio contest got sued out of existence. This radio company. What happened? It's just water. It's just 3 gallons of water. When we drink that much water, what happens to all that water? It goes into your cells. And what happens to your swells? What happens to your cells as well? What cells can you not afford to get swollen? Why not the brain? You guys all got it. Where does the swelling go? It's encased. This is why she was complaining of the worst headache ever. Her brain was swelling and pushing her eyeballs out of her socket. Okay.
How do you treat that?
Great question. What's the problem? All the water's in the cells. If we caught this early enough, what should we do? Maybe a diuretic.
It's the hypertonic.
We would provide a hypertonic solution to pull the water out. Lasix would be great. A diuretic would be great if my reflexes were intact. Okay, So, whole point of this story, what is more dangerous? Hypernatremia or hyponatremia? Hypo is much more dangerous because what organ's at risk? Ta-da. But yeah, check out that video if you guys want. It's a good case study, walks you through, shows you the experiment showing like how water actually moves towards sodium or sodium pulls water. We'll kind of reference that again here in a little bit. Okay. Now, chloride, what do we say about chloride? Perfect. Follows sodium. So if a patient has hypochloremia, what else do they probably have? Hyponatremia. So what is this person at risk for? Brain swelling. Okay, so hypochlor, you guys see that's chloride. This is why you really need to be careful about the reading, especially on your quizzes and your exams. Okay. I'm just going to X out these points down here. Okay. So just follow sodium. Whatever's going on with sodium, same thing's happening with chloride. All right, potassium. Now we talked about potassium already with the action potential. We talked about how potassium should be inside of the cell at rest. That should be where most of your potassium is. Again, you don't need to know this range, but you will. If most of the potassium's inside my cell, should I have a lot in my blood? No, that's why it's a tiny amount. Okay. Key point here is that it affects resting potential. Key point is that it affects resting potential. Okay. So I'm just kind of moving down here to kind of draw this diagram here. So here, you guys have seen this. This is your standard action potential, your threshold. Okay. What potassium does is it affects your resting. So this bottom baseline. Okay. So I'm just writing up, down, K plus. Diagram it out here. And I promise we're going to come back to this slide here to recap. Okay. So let's start with hypokalemia. What's going on with the patient with hypokalemia? In the blood. We have low potassium in their blood. What that does is that lowers your resting potential. So that's hypokalemia. So the blue line, I'm going to scroll down a little bit. The blue line, that is now your new resting. That is your new resting. Okay, we were here, now we're here. Are we closer or further away from the threshold? So does that easier or harder to fire an action potential? Okay, you guys are correct. The analogy here, you guys started at 0%. You need 78% to pass this class. Agreed? If I dropped everyone negative 50% day one, how excited are you? So hypokalemia leads to a decreased excitability. That means the ability to fire an action potential. Let me kind of say here. What I recommend, don't just memorize that. It's going to be too much to keep track of. Think of your resting potential and think about changing that property. See it in your head. Hypokalemia, low. It drops it low. Okay. So therefore, hyperkalemia, what would that do? It will raise that resting. So that's now your new resting. Okay. What should that do to excitability? Increase it, right? Again, you guys start at 0% here. If I give everybody 50% extra credit, People getting a little bit more excited, yeah? Okay, so recapping on that first slide. This is why I draw it this way. Increase in potassium, hyperkalemia would raise your resting. Hypokalemia would lower your resting. Therefore, hyperkalemia, if you're moving that line in your mind, what happens to excitability? Excitability. Mhm.
You said hypo.
Sorry, I said hyper.
Oh, I'm sorry.
You're good, you're good. Increase in excitability. And hypokalemia puts you further away, decreases your excitability. Again, what line are we changing? The resting potential. That's the property of the neuron.
Why, like kidney disease. There are such a high risk of like cardiac arrest.
And I'm going to give you guys a context for this as well. But absolutely, when you have kidney disease, you can't pee out your potassium. So it builds up. What happens if it gets too high? And we'll answer that here in a little bit. Okay. All right, so potassium, one more weird thing about potassium. So it messes with your resting, and it is the only electrolyte affected by pH. I got lazy, I'm sorry. By your pH. Okay, so a little bit of Gen Chem review. With acidosis, if you are acidic, is that a high or low pH? It's a low pH. Okay, we're going to review this too when we get to acid balance. We have a low pH, which means I have excess protons. I have excess protons. So what this kind of looks like, here's your cell. If I am acidic, that means I got a lot of protons in the blood. Okay, those are just hydrogen ions. Where does potassium like to live?
Inside the cell.
Inside the cell. Okay, now in this acidic state, this is going to cause damage to your tissues. You're going to start digesting yourself from the inside out. That's not good. What the body wants to do is try to prevent that. So we're going to bring potassium, we're going to bring hydrogen into the cell. We're going to start storing hydrogen inside of the cell. So less of it's in the blood. Now, if you put a positive magnet next to another positive magnet, what happens? It repels. So who's getting kicked out of the house? Potassium moves out. So now all of that potassium is in my blood. What electrolyte imbalance does acidosis cause? Agree. Hyperkalemia. Okay. Now with alkalosis, it's not as easy to draw. So we'll just say it's the opposite. We have a high pH. We have low proton count, and potassium will move into the cell. Therefore, what electrolyte imbalance would somebody have if they have a very high pH? Hypo, yeah. Okay, does that kind of make sense, hopefully, with the hydrogens? Okay, so looking at each condition here, hypokalemia, don't need to worry about the ranges. Does potassium move water? No. What is the only electrolyte that moves water? Sodium. So would potassium change the size of your cells?
No.
No, that's why we're not drawing it. But what you guys do know, potassium hypokalemia will lower your resting potential. You drop that line. Therefore, you have decreased excitability. Decreased excitability. Now, this comes with a very important point here. Your heart is most sensitive to potassium. Your heart is most sensitive to potassium. So, in which organ, or I say, which organ would be affected first by an imbalance of potassium? The heart. And if I have hypokalemia, less excitability, what does that mean? What's going to happen to my heart if it's less excitable? So just leaving it as broad as possible, this is why we see cardiac dysrhythmias, abnormal heart rhythms. Okay, I'm not going to ask you if it's beating too slow or too fast. We're just going to say cardiac dysrhythmias for both hypo and hyperkalemia. You're going to get into the highs and lows with MedSurg too. What I'm concerned with, hypokalemia, low potassium, doesn't mess with your cell fluids, but it does mess with your heart. Okay, and it lowers your resting potential. Hyperkalemia, so just on the other end of this, we talked about acidosis can cause hyperkalemia. It kicks all that potassium out. This will raise your resting potential, increasing excitability, but again, the big concerning symptom, cardiac dysrhythmias.
Potassium chloride when they're
Sometimes that, yeah, with the you can use dis or arrhythmia. So arrhythmia is fine. Just,
Okay.
that's why I keep using dis, because I like this more.
okay.
But yes, you can use potassium to help kind of with the heart a little bit if it's an electrolyte imbalance. You can also use potassium in the to raise seizure threshold as well. But exactly, we're just trying to give the heart the ability to generate electrical signals.
Because the level's too low.
It was too low, that's why we're giving it to them. Very good. So you guys as nurses, let's talk about giving potassium. You can give potassium orally or you can give it IV. This slide here, you don't need to take a lot of notes on. This is the world we live in, okay? Lethal injection, not taking a stance on it, not getting political, just telling you guys how this works. Step one, you apply a sedative. You apply a sedative. Usually the idea here is to knock them out. Step two, you want to apply a muscle paralyzer. I want to apply a muscle paralyzer. What? So I shouldn't say that. I shouldn't ask that. Sorry. Basically, we're going to paralyze the diaphragm. If I paralyze the diaphragm, what is this person unable to do? Breathe. Step three, you administer potassium chloride and you push it quickly. Now, as future nurses, if you are ever working with potassium, please be careful. Get a second witness. Get someone to verify your calculations. You get somebody to watch your ass while you work with this potassium. Why? This is how we legally kill people. Nurses have been committed, have lost their licenses due to negligence, malpractice, medical errors. Nurses have also been charged with murder for messing up potassium. This is your career. This is your life. Please do not mess it up due to a med error, okay? Why can potassium kill somebody? So if I give this person potassium, what's going to happen to my neuron?
Shrink. No, I lied.
Think about hyperkalemia. It raises that threshold. So let's just say that threshold is here. What happens to excitability? Goes up. So now the heart's beating a little bit faster than it's here. Now heart's beating even faster, let's say 220. And what happens if I keep pushing and your resting is up here? Your heart, once it contracts, guess what? This is resting. This is where it stops. I'm above my threshold. Can I do anything? Oh. Potassium chloride. Heart beats and then stops. Isn't allowed to relax anymore. So, just FYI, you don't need to memorize this. Please, please, please be careful with potassium. If you are ever pushing potassium, you better be working for the state or you got someone on your ass, okay? Honestly, I can't think of a single situation where you would push potassium. IV drip slowly is the fastest way you're gonna get somebody potassium. Okay, so just please be careful. I don't know. There have been accounts of people who are drug users, IV drug users, and they mess up the lethal injection and they're not out completely. And they will describe potassium chloride feeling like fire in their veins. The other reason why we apply a paralyzer is so it's supposed to look more humane. It's really for the benefit of the people watching. It's so that people don't scream, the people don't seize, the people don't convulse during the procedure.
What are your stance on this?
It's my choice. I ain't committing capital murder. Let's put it that way. There's a lot of broken systems, and we can. I would love to get into it. We'll do it during break. But hey, please, please, please be careful with potassium. That's the takeaway point. You don't need to worry about what raises it, what lowers it, the order. I'm not going to ask you about lethal injections. If you're doing lethal injections, you're doing it wrong. Okay. All right, last one here. Calcium. Calcium affects your threshold potential, affects your threshold. Okay. So recapping, potassium affected your what? Resting. Calcium affected your threshold. Does sodium change any of these lines? So sodium does not change any properties of the neuron. Only potassium and calcium change the properties of the neuron. Okay. Now we're going to come back to this slide here because it kind of summarizes it. I'm a visual person, so let me kind of draw it out here. That dashed line, that is your threshold. Same thing, just drawing out your calcium. Okay. So with hypocalcemia, arrows going down. This is now your new threshold. Where before it took you 78% to pass this class. I drop it to 52%. How you feeling? Pretty good. So hypocalcemia does what to excitability? Increases excitability. Okay. Why? Because the new distance is so much shorter. That new distance, you don't have to go the full 78%. You only need to do 50%. Okay. Hypercalcemia, we would raise the threshold. Therefore, what happens to excitability? Decreases. 78% to pass this class, I raise it to 98%. How stoked are you? Right? So recapping here on the slide. If we have hypercalcemia, elevated calcium, Ca, calcemia, elevated calcium in the blood. What's going to happen to my threshold? Goes up, right? Hyper would raise it. So what happens to my excitability? and hypocalcemia increase excitability. So just putting it all in one slide here. Potassium changes your resting. Hyperkalemia versus hypokalemia. Hyperkalemia would do what to excitability? Hyperkalemia. So with hyper, I'm raising it, so they're getting closer. You're getting more or less excited. More. Hypo lowers it. Okay, you can memorize this if you want. Personally, I am a big fan of pictures have 1,000 words. You can remember that calcium changes your threshold. One goes up, one goes down. Potassium changes your resting. You got it already figured out. Okay. Other big difference, potassium affects what? What organ? Heart. Calcium affects skeletal muscle. Calcium affects skeletal muscle. So I'm going back up to just this slide right here. We're talking about the wording. Affects the threshold potential at skeletal muscle. Okay. Hypocalcemia makes you more excitable. Lowers that threshold, makes you more excitable. You have a muscle cramp. Let's say, I don't know, you're sprinting, you're a triathlete, you're on the running portion. You start having a hamstring or your glute spasms and locks up. Do you want to eat a banana, handful of salt, or a glass of milk? All right, so if I eat the banana, is that going to change my calcium or my potassium? Potassium. Now, eating that banana, is that going to raise or lower my resting? What happens to excitability? Increases. So will that help my muscle spasm to have it more excitable? What? Bananas aren't going to help. Potassium raises your excitability. Your muscles already contracted. Do you want it to contract more? I don't need a banana. This is weird. Also, by the way, avocados have much more potassium than bananas.
Oh, I mean milk.
Why would milk help? Why would milk help? What about the calcium? I have more calcium. What happens to my threshold? Gets higher. So what happens to excitability if it's all the way up here? It's less excitable. So what will happen to your muscle? It'll finally relax. Huh. So why is it that we've been saying like eat a banana when you've been cramped? Sports science is kind of witchcraft. A lot of it's word by mouth. Okay. So sodium, would that help you in any way? No. Okay. That's what I want you guys to kind of visualize. Take, for example, and what would, backing up. So calcium would raise that resting, or calcium would raise that threshold. Agreed?
Yes.
What's another piece of evidence? Why What would be another reason we would want to give a glass of milk over a banana? It's your hamstring that's contracted, right? Not your heart. Okay. How are we feeling? Good. Visualize this bit. Visualize the sodium moving water. Okay. All right, big picture. This is everything collected on one slide. Low potassium in the blood. Boop, 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 boop. Okay. What do we call a heart spasm? If your heart's spasming. I'm thinking about like, if you have a muscle spasm, it's locked down here. It's like a heart attack. There's no such thing as a heart spasm, it's just a heart attack. Okay, so if you see muscle spasm, what does it default to, skeletal or cardiac? Skeletal. So just a little bit of vocabulary there. We never call it just a heart spasm. Okay, that's part one. Take a little break. We'll get into fluid balance. This is going to be part two. Okay, so let's say, I don't know, 10 minutes, 45, we'll pick back up again.
Right.
everything.
Isn't there like a site drug that like stops excessive tabs?
Yes, I can't tell you the name of it, but we did come across it. All right, so this will be part 2. We're gonna be talking about fluid balance. So the name of the game here is just water movement, okay? This slide here is just talking about different hormones that affect water movement. We will not be getting into these until exam 5. This is antidiuretic hormone, aldosterone. That's gonna be reabsorbing sodium, secreting potassium. Just a little practice with Latin here. Natriuretic hormone. What do you think that makes you do? It's a uretic, so it's like a diuretic, makes you pee. What's nah? Yeah, it makes you pee sodium. So this is what I'm saying. Not testing you on it, but sometimes knowing a little bit of Latin helps. Okay. All right, so how do we balance fluids? These are your intakes, these are your outputs. The number one way to put fluid in your body is drinking. Number one way to get rid of fluid in your body, urination. Okay. The one I'm going to kind of highlight here is breathing. Now, breathing is it input or output? Take, for example, you got your mucous membranes, you're inhaling that humidity, right? But it's not crossing your blood. Do not think that inhalation is how you get water. If you are inhaling water, what are you doing?
Aspirating.
Yeah, drowning, aspirating. Are you going to be living long? What should you do with the water? You should be breathing it out. So just heads up about there. Don't get into your own heads. You do not want to breathe in water. Okay. All right. So when it comes to fluid balance, there's this tug of war. There's always this constant exchange. What we talked about was on the kids' side. What we talked about was these little cells. Right? We talked about sodium. That pulls water in and out of the cells. Okay. That right there is the osmotic force or pressure. So we've kind of talked about this small scale. Where we're headed with this is large scale. Okay, where we're headed with this, just diagramming it really quick. We're not talking about individual cells. We're talking about blood vessels. We're talking about blood vessels, exchanging water between the spaces, between your skin, between your cells, between your organs. Okay. So water can come out of your capillary. Water can also go into your capillary. When it comes to your blood, your blood vessels, we have what's called a hydrostatic pressure and an osmotic oncotic pressure. Okay. So again, this is just an overview. Don't need to get crazy into it because we are about to. All I'm saying is we talked about here, tiny little cells. We're headed to much bigger picture now. Okay. So this slide here is a nice little review. We have a hypotonic solution. Those little green dots, that represents sodium. In a hypotonic solution, where's water going? Into the cell, causing what to happen to the cell? To expand. Eventually it lysed, i.e. exploded. Okay, isotonic. What's going on there? In and out equally. Yep. So therefore nothing happens to the cell. Nice. And hypertonic. Leaving out, shriveling, dehydrating yourself. Okay. Now we keep talking about these little green dots being sodium, yes? Protein acts the same way. So I don't like this slide and I keep forgetting to change it every quarter. Scratch out potassium. Scratch out potassium here. Okay. Your big takeaway here, I'm going to put it in pink. Sodium and proteins pull water. Sodium and proteins pull water. So these green dots, they could be sodium or they could be proteins. Water would flow the same way. Okay. If we're talking about sodium, we're talking about osmotic. We can just say pressures to keep it uniform. Osmotic pressures. You can use pressures or force interchangeably here. Okay. If we're talking about sodium, we're using the term osmotic. When we use the term, or when we talk about proteins, we use the term oncotic. Okay, so not cancer, but oncotic pressure. Osmotic, sodium, oncotic proteins. I'll give you guys working examples of that too.
So in the lectures that you have us watch, in this picture of the kids, you wrote like whole body capillaries and interstitial hydrostatic pressures first, osmotic pressures, and then cellular, extracellular fluid, and intracellular fluid, osmotic pressure. So really on the capillary and interstitial, that would be oncotic pressures, not osmotic, correct? Because for the capillaries, it's not the sodium, it's the proteins.
It's sodium and proteins.
Or capillary too.
Mhm.
Okay.
Yeah, we're going to recap it here.
Okay.
Okay, so large picture. Here is your blood vessel. Okay, here's your blood vessel. Inside of your blood vessel, you should have pressure. Yes, your blood pressure. We term that the capillary. I abbreviate just cap. Capillary hydrostatic. Okay, that is your blood pressure. Now, if you poke a hole in your blood vessel, do you bleed outward or inward? So which direction does the capillary hydrostatic want to move water? Wants to move it out of the capillary. Okay. I did not leave enough room. Okay. The other force here is your capillary oncotic osmotic pressure. That's going to be generated by albumin. Albumin is a protein within your blood. It's a protein. What do proteins want to do with water? Proteins and salt pull water. If all of your proteins are here, where's the water going? Into the capillary or out of the capillary? Into. Okay. Now, when it comes to the interstitial means in between. We are more than just blood vessels. We are enclosed blood vessels. So kind of think of this box like your skin. Okay. Here's your capillary. Now your interstitial pressures are reactionary. Without getting too crazy with it. Newton's third law. If I push on this wall, what's the wall doing to me? Pushing back. Capillary is pushing against the wall. When the wall pushes back, we call that the interstitial hydrostatic. Okay, again, the capillary is pushing against the wall. We're talking about the wall pushing back on the capillary. So it wants to move water into the capillary. Okay. Then we have interstitial oncotic osmotic. That means oncotic, I got my proteins out here. And I got some salt out here. Where does that want to move water? Out of the capillary. These are the 4 pressures that you are going to become very, very familiar with. Okay. We're going to combine them all together in one diagram. So here is a very zoomed in view of the capillary. Inside of our interstitial space. Okay. We have two capillary pressures. We have capillary hydrostatic. That was generated by your blood pressure, correct? What organ generates your blood pressure? Blood pressure via the heart. And which direction does it want to move water? Whenever you say a direction, you also have to say a destination, right? So out of what? Out of the capillary. Because I can also say capillary hydrostatic wants to move water into the interstitial space. So if you say out or in, make sure you specify direction, but then a location. I can say out of the capillary or into the interstitial space. Okay. And then your capillary oncotic, osmotic, that was albumin, a protein. And that's via your liver. So same question. Where does water want to move due to the capillary oncotic osmotic pressure? Into the capillary or out of the interstitial space. Exactly. Okay. Now, opposing this, your capillary hydrostatic is pushing on the wall. What's that force when the wall pushes back? What's that called? Interstitial, and then hydrostatic, I always think it's pushing. So, yeah, interstitial, hydrostatic. I push on the wall. Guess what? The wall pushes back on me. Only a little bit. Only a little bit. Interstitial, that's it. Okay. And then you have your interstitial, oncotic, osmotic pressure. That's going to pull water out. So notice they are hydrostatic, hydrostatic, but in opposite directions. Oncotic, osmotic, opposite directions. That's why you need to state capillary or interstitial. Okay. The interstitial, hydrostatic, osmotic, we're going to talk about these little bits more with renal. Right now, I'm just kind of introducing it. If this sounds confusing, please practice with this. This comes back with a vengeance when we talk about kidneys. Okay. So if you didn't like my drawing, that's okay. I only hurting my feelings. Capillary hydrostatic pressure, fluid out of the capillary. Capillary hydrostatic fluid out of the capillary. This is your, I would say, the strongest pressure. Your blood pressure is the strongest pressure. So kind of looking at the picture here, my blood pressure wants to push all of the water out of my blood vessel. If I keep it outside of my blood vessel, is that a good thing or a bad thing? If all of the water in my blood is out here, is that good or bad? It's pretty bad. I need some way to put it back. How would I put that water back? Interstitial hydrostatic is tiny, but that would help. What other arrow would help push water back into the capillary? So what I'm getting at here is capillary hydrostatic pushes water out. Capillary oncotic osmotic sucks it back in. Okay. We're constantly exchanging between these two places. So capillary oncotic osmotic fluid into the capillary. Okay. It's not as strong, but we're not going to get into the finite stuff yet. Okay. These two, they're the smallest by far. They're more, again, reactionary. They're not going to be doing anything significant yet. Okay. So if you didn't like my drawing, here's a better one. Capillary hydrostatic pressure. What does that want to do with water? Get it out where? Out of, into the, right, so here's all that water. I better be able to suck that water back in. How am I going to suck that water back in? Capillary oncotic pressure. You guys see how this is like a nice little circle? Okay. Now, what I mean by strongest and weakest, your capillary hydrostatic pressure moves about, give or take, 100% of the water in your blood. Your capillary oncotic pressure takes back 90%. So how much is left over in the interstitial space? 10%. Good or bad? All right, so the analogy here, when you guys become nurses, you make more money than I do because, you know, teaching. I require that you guys pay me 10% of your salary. It's bad. Why? That 10% will accumulate over time. That 10% means I have more and more water in between my tissues, in between my cells. What's going to happen to my tissues if I have a bunch of water? Swelling, and we call that. I need some way to get rid of this last 10%, else I'm going to look like a marshmallow. Edema, sorry. This is where your lymphatics comes in. Your lymphatics drains that other 10%. So in theory, in a healthy human being, should I have edema?
No.
Perfect. I should not have this buildup of fluid. So a couple of questions. If I ... increase the capillary hydrostatic pressure, what will happen? So if I increase the capillary hydrostatic pressure, I told you guys before, what's the default? 100, right? I told you guys default's 100. So if I increase it, let's keep practicing. Megan, give me a random number. Above 100. 130. Sorry, I should have been more clear. So if we increase this 130, my capillary oncotic still only sucks in 90. I only suck in 10% here. How much is left over? I have 30% floating around here. That means what result, what condition is going to happen if I increase my capillary hydrostatic pressure? I get edema. Okay. What do I mean by increase the capillary hydrostatic pressure? If I increase that pressure, what pathology am I talking about? What condition am I talking about where you have a high pressure inside of your blood vessels? High blood pressure? That's sodium. Hypertension. Sorry. So if I increase capillary hydrostatic pressure, that's hypertension. If somebody has hypertension, what does that lead to? Edema. If I have hypertension, this is why I get kinkles like Chelsea Clinton. Okay. This is why my ankles get swollen. If I decrease capillary oncotic osmotic pressure. So let's kind of break it down. What's going on here? Decrease in the capillary oncotic osmotic. It means I have less protein and less salt in my blood. What organ was responsible for putting that protein and salt in my blood? Here, I would have a liver dysfunction. So whether that be liver cirrhosis, maybe I'm drinking too much, maybe hepatitis, whatever. If I have, let's go with liver cirrhosis. If I have liver cirrhosis, This is decreasing, right? What was our original capillary hydrostatic pressure? Oops, sorry. The original one here? It was 100, right? What we changed it to 130 in the last question. Right now we're talking about a new situation here. Before this used to suck in 90. Give me a random number less than 90. 60. How much is left over? Yeah, but then we also got the 10% here, right? So I'm gonna say 30. Again, kind of works out that way. So if I have liver cirrhosis, what do I get to look forward to? If I have any imbalance of these fluids, these pressures, what do you think results? Okay. And we're going to practice this with this a little bit here, but I'm glad you guys hopefully see that a little bit.
What causes edema to be like on one side rather than bilateral?
It just depends on whatever's going on with the blood vessels on that side.
Oh, okay.
Maybe one side's more leaky. Maybe we have a blockage on one side versus the other side. But yeah, great question. Okay. Ta-da. Okay. Edema. Again, that's just fluid in the interstitial space. Because I'll bet you a lot of them have hypertension.
Yeah, and heart failure.
Yep. Congestive heart failure. Okay, so edema. We just talked about accumulation of fluids in the interstitial space. What on earth could cause it? Increased capillary hydrostatic pressure. Again, I've increased my capillary hydrostatic pressure. That means my blood pressure went up. That's hypertension right there. Now, did we just establish that hypertension can lead to edema? Why? Where's all that water going if somebody has hypertension? It's going out of the capillary into the interstitial space. Okay. Decrease in plasma oncotic pressure because I have less albumin. Why would I have less albumin? What organ is dysfunctional? Liver. Increased capillary permeability. Oh God, that rings bells. Brings dark repressed memories from exam 1, doesn't it? What is increased capillary permeability? What caused that? Histamine. So if I release histamine, let's just say on the back of my hand, I release a bunch of histamine. What's going to happen to the back of my hand? It's going to swell. We call that edema. Why? More water is leaking out of the capillary. Oh, did I mention that this class is kind of cumulative? You should probably know that. Okay. Last one here, the lymph obstruction. How much did your lymphatics drain? 10%. If I have some sort of blockage here, that 10% is going to build up. That's all that's saying. Okay. So in a visual format, you start messing with stuff, all roads lead to edema. Okay. That's part 2. Not too bad. Doing okay? Do we want to break now? Keep rolling for a little bit and then take a break? Okay. All right, so recapping. Part 1 today, we were talking about electrolytes, sodium moving water, calcium, potassium modulating the neuron. Part 2 was the fluid balance, okay? My recommendation, draw out that diagram. If you increase one, where does water go? If you decrease the other one, where does water go?
Can it lead to anything but edema, or is edema always the answer? That we'll talk about.
Edema is always the answer that we talk about. For now, exam 5 might throw a wrench into that. But for now, let's just stick with knowing what it is first before we start messing with it. All right, so now we're going to be talking about acid-base balance. So Gen Chem is back to officially haunt you. Sorry. I know, I don't like Gen Chem either. All right, so I'm going to keep it really brief though. Promise it's not going to be too bad. Okay. With pH, that's measuring how acidic somebody is. Okay, range 0 to 14. Humans, couple of values you need to know. Our ideal set point is 7.40. The ideal pH is 7.40. We are all at 7.40. 7.0 is exactly in half. So as humans, we are ideally at 7.4. Does that make us slightly basic or slightly acidic? If we're going higher, that's going to make you, so yeah. If we're going higher, almost tripped on that one. If we're going higher, that's making you basic. Okay, sorry. Almost. The physiological range here, so I call this the operational range, is 7.35 to 7.45. Operational range. If you are between this range right here, you are still operational. 7.35, you're okay. Life's not great, but you're still operating just fine. 7.4, now things are going to start falling off the bandwagon. Notice 7.40 is right in the middle there. So, what separates you between life and death? 0.05 in either direction. I want to make sure that this is a very small range. That's what I'm getting at here. Okay. So recapping here before I mess this up. When pH is low, acidic or basic? Thank you. It's acidosis. Okay, therefore, if it's high, we call it either being basic or alkalosis. Okay, when we are acidic, just recapping down what we started before, low pH, alkalosis is high pH. Protons, H plus. H plus. If we are acidic, do we have a lot or a little of these? A lot. Remember, we talked about this with potassium getting kicked in and out of the cell. So we have a lot of protons. Protons measures acidity. So the more protons you have, the more acidic you are. Last one here, bicarbonate. Bicarbonate measures basicness, measures alkalosis. If I am acidic, would I have high or low bicarbonate? That's a 3, by the way, sorry. Yep, it would be low. Okay, protons measure acidity. Bicarbonate measures basicness. Okay, think about them like pumpkin spice lattes. The more pumpkin spice lattes you are, the more basic you are. Okay, they're not back in season yet. I can diss on them.
King Super says holding stuff up. Yeah. So I.
Isn't like there's like labor like we Labor Day is still a thing. Kids these days. So it's just the opposite for the alkalosis. Okay, so if someone is basic, they have a high pH or low protons or high bicarbonate count. We're going to work back and forth between these. Okay. Yeah, basic or alkalosis, sorry. No, these are interchangeable. They both mean way on the high end of the pH.
Humans are basic, right?
Humans are slightly basic compared to nature at 7.0. Yeah. So both of them, both just mean to the right. So right here would be 7.0, right? If you're at all to the right, at all, 7.1. That's basic or alkalotic.
Okay.
Either one. Yep. To the left is just acidic. Okay.
So we would use those interchangeably.
I like saying basic just because it's easier to write and read, but then when we do ABGs, you'll usually use alkalosis. But yeah, you can use it interchangeably. This slide right here just shows you the different pH of stuff in the world. Don't need to memorize it. Don't even need to care about it. Oh, come on. Screw it. All right, body acids. There are two forms, volatile and non-volatile. No, you do not have explosive acid inside of you. Okay. Volatile just means that it can evaporate. Non-volatile can't evaporate. So I'm going to say no evaporation. Okay, what organ handles most of your gases?
Lungs.
Therefore, your volatile acids are handled by your lungs in the form of CO2. Yeah, you guys all got it. Okay, you want to breathe them out. Non-volatile, you can't evaporate these. So what's the other? Yep, we're going to pee it out. Okay. We're going to elaborate on this here, so don't put too much weight behind this one yet. All right, acids. Where do we get acids? I'm just going to scratch this out. We get acids from just living. You make acids from living. Okay. We need ways to regulate that acid. Your blood works as a buffer. We'll elaborate on these terms here. Your blood will be a buffer. Kidneys. Again, your kidneys, their whole job is to pee out those non-volatile. So I'm just going to say pee. Lungs, their job is to breathe. Your bones are made of calcium carbonate. This is the #1 source of carbonate. #1 source of carbonate. Okay. Do you have a lot of bones in your body?
Yeah.
That's why we are slightly basic, 7.4. It's got a lot of bones, a lot of bicarbonate. Okay. All right, so this chart here kind of compares between the two. Couple of points while we before we jump into it. Buffers. Buffers, their job is to buy time. Their only job is to buy time. They cannot fix the problem. Okay. So buffers buy time, but they can't fix the problem. I can't think of buffers like a Band-Aid. Band-Aids are nice, they cover up things, but let's just say I fall and I cut my arm open on the side of a cliff. Is a Band-Aid really gonna help me? Got bigger problems, but hey, at least it allows me to get to the hospital, right? Physiological buffer systems, these are your fixes. These are what's going to fix the problems. So the buffer, the thing that buys you time in your body, is the bicarbonate buffer system, i.e. your blood. Your blood buys you time, but can your blood fix your problem? No. What are the two organs that we keep talking about that can probably fix your problem? Right. Respiratory, your lungs. That's going to provide a quick fix. Okay. While your renal response, this is going to be a more permanent fix. So I'm going to say more long-term. Fix. Right? Think about it. What do you do more throughout the day? Breathe or pee? Hopefully breathe. Okay. Okay. So a buffer binds to without significant change in pH. Again, the whole idea here is to buy time, but is not a fix. So a little bit of Gen Chem review, nothing crazy, I promise. I'm going to scroll up a little bit so you can see this picture. Here's a beaker. Inside that beaker, I'm going to have 4 molecules of acid, 4 molecules of base. So green is base, red is acid. This is a buffer where you have equal amounts acid and base. This is a buffer. Okay. If I add a single acid molecule, what's going to happen to the pH of the solution? Will it become more acidic or more basic? So think about these like a bar fight. You got 4 people on one side and 4 people on the other. One more dude jumps in. Is that really going to make a difference? What I'm getting at here is without significant change of pH. So if I add in a little acid, there should be no change. There should be no change here because I already got 4 in here. Okay. If I add a base, would that change anything? So if I change this red dot to a green dot, they going to change anything? This buys you time. But if I add in 4, I drew more than 4, but if I add in a bunch of acid, would that change something? Absolutely. I can overwhelm the system. Okay. Do you guys see what I'm getting at here? Is your blood? This is your blood. Can your blood fix your problems? No, it only holds it, but we can easily overwhelm your blood. So recapping here. Without significant change in the pH, buys time, not a fix, i.e. it prevents changes of blood pH. Okay. So consists of a pair, weak acid, and its conjugate base. So in your blood, you got a little bit of acid, got a little bit of base that protects you from crazy changes. Okay. Now, CO2, carbon dioxide. Carbon dioxide is acidic. Carbon dioxide is acidic. So carbonated water versus tap water. Anybody like drinking carbonated water? And I do, right? There's a bite to it. Tastes good. Why? When I add CO2 to water, I make it acidic. That's that bite to it. Versus tap water, it doesn't have that same bite. If you ever drink flat carbonated water, there's no bite to it. Yeah, it's kind of gross. Yeah. So what I'm getting at is if I take in a bunch of CO2 in my body, I'm starting to store CO2 in my body. My blood prevents these changes, but what will happen to my blood pH? I'm building up CO2. It's acidic. What happens to my pH? Does it go up or down if I'm acidic? It goes down. Okay. Bicarbonate is the conjugate here. So this is your base. Now you do not need to memorize this equation, but it can be helpful. Water, a little bit of a recap. How much of your body is made up of water? 60%. Give or take 60%, exactly. When you have water combined with CO2, that gives you carbonic acid. Then that disassociates to a proton and bicarbonate. So all I'm getting at here is you are mostly made of water, yes? You hold CO2. What are you building up in your body? You're building up acid. Okay. Now that can disassociate into that proton and its conjugate base, that bicarbonate. So big takeaway point. CO2 acts like an acid. The more CO2 you build up, the higher or lower your pH goes. Lower, okay? Oh, there it is. All right, I thought I had it on the slide. That's the equation we were talking about. Okay, and bicarbonate is your base. So let's kind of put this into some application here. I am mostly water, right? I take a deep breath in. I'm holding CO2. I'm technically building up carbonic acid. Has my pH changed? No, because what's preventing my pH from changing? My blood, my buffer, but can I hold my breath forever?
No.
Eventually it's gonna give out. Okay, so this is what I'm saying. This is why you can hold your breath for 5 minutes. You can hold your breath. I think the record was this 7-year-old girl. She was young. 7-year-old girl fell through ice. They found her 47 minutes later. She held her, like she couldn't breathe underneath the ice, but revived her, no neurological deficiencies.
How long was she until she remembered? You know, was she conscious for 47?
No, she was out.
Oh, I was like,
But I'm saying you can hold your breath and be okay. You're not gonna instantly go acidic. Your blood buys you time. Okay. So what are the two most important organs when it comes to actually fixing your pH then? Lungs.
kidneys?
Yep. I'm gonna say respiratory. Now, when it comes to the kidneys, in acid-base balance, they don't say kidneys, they don't say renal, they say metabolic. Sorry, I don't know why. That's your kidneys. Okay. Now let's think about your lungs. Two options. You can breathe faster or you can breathe slower. What are those terms in what are those terms in medical language? Or I'm going to use hyper and hypovent just to keep it easy. But hyperventilation, or I can hypovent. Okay. My kidneys, they do two things. They reabsorb or they can secrete. Now, if I am reabsorbing something, that means I'm keeping it, right? Reabsorb is I'm going to take it from my urine, stick it in my blood. So from urine to blood. For the secretion, it's going from my blood to my urine so I can secrete it out. Blood to urine. Okay, the things that my kidneys will be reabsorbing or secreting will be either protons or bicarbonate. Protons or bicarbonate. Oh, my kidneys will either reabsorb or secrete protons or bicarbonate.
What do you mean from urine to blood? Right? So I'm just a little confused.
From like, as your blood is circulating, it's like filtrate, technically it's not urine, but I just say urine, make it easy. So it's midway through. It's not in your bladder yet, it's just in your kidneys.
Oh, okay.
That eventually ends up being your urine. So we'll talk more about that when we hit the kidneys, but just reabsorb is what we're keeping, secreting is what we're losing. Okay, I'm going to provide you some context here so it makes more sense. Okay. All right. I didn't write this slide. I swear I didn't write this slide, but I guarantee you this is going to be on every single nursing class you're ever going to be in. You need to know these. Okay. What on earth is going on? So first up, we're going to work on translating these. Okay. Metabolic acidosis. This is a medical diagnosis. You guys will not be diagnosing patients, right? But on handoff, you might have a patient that has metabolic acidosis. You need to know what this means. So let's start with metabolic. What organ does metabolic refer to? Kidneys. Whenever we say heart failure, we're specifying the organ that's failing. We're specifying the organ that's failing. So that means my kidneys are failing, leading what to happen to my pH? It's going down, it's reducing, very good. So if I have metabolic acidosis, my kidneys are failing, causing a drop in my pH. Okay, now flipping that, if we do respiratory, let's say respiratory alkalosis, somebody translate that for me. Lungs are failing, causing lungs are failing, leading to a rise in pH. Do I need to do the two in the middle? Are you guys okay with that?
Are we testing on it?
Oh, yes.
Let's not do that.
But we did all four possibilities. Fine. Kidneys failing, leading to alkalosis. That means my pH is going up. Respiratory, my lungs are failing. Dropping pH. Okay, so step one, figure out whatever's being asked of you.
So, okay. So like in these situations, your kidneys are failing, causing the decrease in pH, right? Your kidneys aren't failing because. there is a
Correct.
decrease in pH.
Correct. Kidneys are failing, causing a drop in pH. Correct. That's a good assertion. Okay, please.
When you were saying dropping or increasing, does that mean reabsorbing or secreting?
It could be either. And we're going to get into with this slide here, I promise. So I'm going to give you guys that context I've been kind of prolonging here. Okay, so we have two organs that we've been talking about this entire time: respiratory and metabolic, i.e. your kidneys, right? So failure of, let's do respiratory first. And metabolic down below. Now, your lungs can fail one of two ways. What are the two ways your lungs can fail? Acidosis or alkalosis. So I'll do acidosis up top. Okay, so if a patient has respiratory acidosis, it means my lungs are failing. If I'm looking for symptoms, which organ should I, so think about this. If somebody has heart failure, what organ would you want to assess for symptoms? So respiratory acidosis, where should I be looking for symptoms? Lungs. So in terms of symptoms, how would the lungs be failing leading to acidosis? How would my lungs fail leading to acidosis?
Build up the CO2 hyperventilation.
My lungs get rid of CO2, yes? CO2 is acidic. That means I'm building up CO2. Build CO2. I'm building up CO2. What am I not doing?
Exhale.
Or, yeah, I'm not breathing. So hypoventilation. Now let's kind of recap this here. Somebody who's hypoventilating, let's just say, I don't know, somebody had a fun night, way too much heroin. Drug overdose.
Yeah.
The heroin is suppressing their central nervous system, causing their lungs to hypovent. They're building up CO2. So if you were to, no. So in a patient with respiratory acidosis, what symptom should you expect? Low respiratory count, maybe low oxygen saturation, hypoventilation. Okay, so let's flip this here. Respiratory alkalosis. They're not holding onto their CO2. What are they doing instead? They're blowing it off too much. Blow off CO2. I want you guys right now, because I'm tired of holding my breath. I want you to try to blow off as much CO2 as you can. That was one breath. Keep going. What are you doing? What are you doing if you're hyperventilating? Yes, you are exhaling, but you are hyperventilating. What would cause somebody hyperventilation? Anxiety, maybe a panic attack. Absolutely. Okay. Now we're going to switch to metabolic here, talking about your kidneys. Kidneys can fail one of two ways: acidosis or alkalosis. Yeah.
Those are like two very different examples.
Mhm.
Like heroin overdose and anxiety attack.
Mhm.
Is not gonna die from an anxiety attack. So what would be a deadly? What would something that is like deadly that could cause like alkalosis in our respiratory system?
Okay. What part of the brain controls respirations?
Brainstem.
Brainstem. What if I have trauma to the brainstem, like a blood clot?
How would we know whether that's acidotic or alkalosis? Like on an exam, for like an exam.
If I would describe like, so I could either go two ways. I can say patient is hyperventilating. What are they at risk for? Respiratory acidosis or respiratory alkalosis?
Okay.
Or I can say patient has respiratory alkalosis. What symptom would the nurse expect to see upon assessment?
So you would like directly say
What it
if they
is.
have alkalosis or acidosis?
Not
Yep.
they have these symptoms. Are they acidotic or alkalotic?
No. I'm not asking you guys to diagnose.
Okay.
No. I'll give you the diagnosis. Okay, or yeah, I'll give you the diagnosis. So, metabolic acidosis, what's failing? Kidneys. So where should I look for symptoms? Kidneys. So in terms of the kidneys, if I am acidotic, that means I am holding on to whatever's making me acidic. What does the kidneys handle that is acidic? Protons. So that means I am reabsorbing protons. I'm putting all of those protons back into my blood, making me acidic. What am I peeing too much of? Secretion. It's going to be bicarbonate. Okay. I am peeing out my base. I am keeping all my acids that will make me acidic. And vice versa for the other one. Reabsorb protons or bicarbonate and secretion of those protons.
So I have a question. For the acidosis, does that mean that the urine is basic? And for alkalosis, the urine will be acidic?
Okay, so if I am secreting, it's going into my urine, yes? So I have a bunch of bicarbonate in my urine. So therefore, with metabolic acidosis, what would my urine be? Yeah, so you would have basic urine. Good question. It's kind of counterintuitive. If I am acidic, remember you guys are looking at the person's blood. They're keeping all the acid in their blood. They're peeing out all of their base. Okay, versus metabolic alkalosis here, I am secreting protons. Is my urine going to be high or low in pH? Low, because it's acidic. Now, for now, rolling with this example here, only one of these are going to fail. Only one of these are going to fail. Let's use the kidneys here. Let's say my kidneys are failing. If my kidneys go down, what other organ can I use to help compensate? Your lungs.
No.
Yeah, because there's only two organs that handles pH. Lungs, kidneys. If one goes down, the other one has to do double time. So if my kidneys are failing, metabolic acidosis, I need to expect compensation. My lungs are going to be working harder. So let's start with metabolic alkalosis. Here, that means, or let's start with acidosis. I am acidic. Would my lungs want to hyperventilate or hypoventilate? Why would I want to hyperventilate? I want to even it out by doing what's my CO2? blow off my CO2. Because I got way too many protons, but I can still get rid of the acid via CO2. Okay. Now, metabolic alkalosis. My kidneys are failing, making me basic. How can my lungs help me? Why would hypoventilation help me? Yeah, I'm going to say hold CO2. Why would I want to hold CO2? To balance out bicarbonate. Even it out. Okay. Now, respiratory. My lungs are failing. Who's going to help me out? Kidneys. Now, your kidneys are very straightforward. If you're acidic or you're basic, we're just going to pee out the extra and reabsorb the good stuff. Okay. Respiratory acidosis. I have too much acid. What would my kidneys want to, let me put right here, reabsorb and secrete? They do two things at once. So start with, what do you have too much of in acidosis? You have too much base or too much acid? Too much acid. And what can the kidneys pee out that is acidic? Protons. What would you want to reabsorb? Bicarbonate. Okay. Respiratory alkalosis. Reabsorb, secrete. What would I want to pee out with alkalosis? Alkalosis, basic, too many bicarbonate. Should pee out the bicarbonate. Keep my protons. Okay, so you can memorize this if you want. Anybody gonna try? Please don't. Please don't. I don't even have this memorized. I seriously don't. All I have to do is start right here and then work that logic all the way through. Start with, what's your condition? Respiratory acidosis. What does that mean? What's failing? How am I failing? I was gonna say I'm just dropping my pH onto acidic. My lungs are failing, dropping my pH. So symptoms wise, I need to look at the lungs. How are my lungs failing, making me acidic? That's the symptoms. Compensation, I know my kidneys need to compensate. They're gonna pee out the extra and reabsorb the good stuff. What I recommend, on a separate sheet of paper, don't just try to memorize this. Walk yourselves through the logic, okay? Especially because this comes up over and over and over again. One step at a time, just like your neuron. The last step gives you a hint about the next step, okay?
This is something that the body will naturally do. For example, where somebody gets and like heroin overdose and they can start peeing themselves.
Not so much peeing themselves, but so let's go back to the heroin example. Somebody is in respiratory acidosis because they're a little high. They're not breathing. So their kidneys will start making acidic urine. That doesn't mean that it's like going out. It could be like sitting in the bladder, but they're making acidic urine and reabsorbing that bicarbonate to help. Absolutely.
Respiratory acidosis, pH is dropping.
Mm-hmm.
And alkalosis, pH increasing.
Yes.
Okay, and then metabolic acidosis, pH is increasing,
Acidosis, pH should be decreasing.
still decreasing.
Acidosis, always low pH. Alkalosis, or being basic, high pH. So compensation can happen two ways. Your lungs can either increase or decrease CO2 output. So you can either hyperventilate or hypoventilate. Kidneys, they handle both at the same time. We just drew it above, so that's why I'm not really writing anything here. Okay, so recapping everything here about the pH balance. Blood, what's good for your blood? What does your blood do? Transport stuff. It's a buffer. It buys time. Your lungs can provide a fix. What kind of fix can your lungs give you? So very quick. Think about breathing. You breathe what, 10, 20 times a minute? Pretty quick. Okay. Quick fix, sorry. Quick fix. And then your kidneys. Once the urine is in your bladder, unless you're Bear Grylls, are you getting it back? Okay. So I'm going to say more long-term. Okay. Cool. All right, and just recapping, what was the only electrolyte affected by pH? Sodium, potassium, calcium, or chloride? Potassium, K getting kicked out of home. Okay, so this is the effect of pH on the central nervous system. This is the way I personally remember it. Acidosis, what's happening to my pH, up or down? Good. It's going down, and so is the CNS action. That's the way I remember it. Versus alkalosis, pH is going up. We're going to see irritability or overstimulation. Okay. This is along with potassium, yeah. So I'll just put it here. Potassium only electrolyte affected by pH. All right, so on these slides here, you do not need to memorize all of these symptoms. You don't need to memorize these symptoms. That's not the point, okay? With acidosis, do you guys remember when I have a bunch of protons outside of the cell, the protons go into the cell, what happens to potassium? Plus and plus. Yeah, potassium gets kicked out. Ta-da! I wasn't lying to you. All I'm saying, you don't need to memorize anything. You don't need to memorize these at all. Just using this to show you acidosis leads to hyperkalemia. Alkalosis leads to hypokalemia. Just reiterating that point that we drew. Okay. So just saying pH messes with potassium, just reiterating that. Okay. All right. Now, if you did not like my explanation and you like to read, eat your heart out. Just recapping here, metabolic acidosis, what's wrong? My kidneys, and they're doing what to my pH? Lowering it. So who's going to fix it? Lungs. Respiratory centers to increase respiratory rate and blow off CO2. That's the compensation. Your kidneys go down, making you acidic. Let's get rid of that CO2. Metabolic alkalosis. Kidneys are going down. What should my lungs do? Hold on to CO2. Done via hypoventilation. Okay. Sorry, let me scoot that up. So again, if you didn't like my explanation of that, there you go. Respiratory acidosis. What are so lungs are failing. What are your kidneys going to do? Yep. Excrete protons and reabsorb more bicarbonate. And then just vice versa. Kidneys will compensate. Okay. Now, can you live without your kidneys? Can your lungs take over for you forever? No. So this is great for keeping you alive for now, but not forever. Okay, so these compensations do wear out over time.
How long would that take?
Depends. So take, for example, with COVID, we would see a lot of respiratory acidosis. Sometimes some patients, they develop it within 4 days, other patients 4 hours. So it just really, there's so many other factors, but eventually things will give out. Depends on your health, age. Great question. Being very ominous here. Okay. Okay, let's take a little break here because what we are about to get into will be the free response for your exam too. Yes, I'm flat out telling you what your free response will be. Yes, it's not an essay, but yes. So let's say, I don't know, 7 minutes, so 3 till 3. I don't know, 2:57, report back. We'll knock this out, get you guys out of here a little early. There's only 3 of these that you need to worry about. That's still okay, it's saturated. Spring socks will get in there. You think we want for that to get the top. But Megan, Eminem. Sarah. No hot? Am I saying that right? No hot? No hot, okay. Rebecca. Riley. No. Spring sock is Elizabeth, isn't it?
Yeah.
Okay. Give me the first letter. L. Was not expecting that one. Working on the compass. And I'll try to have this lecture uploaded ASAP. I do gotta run home. I have a meeting with a loan lender, just try to figure out how much we're pre-approved for. It's like gambling. If you guys ever want to like gambling, try to buy a house. Ugh.
Swaddled into their intelligence. They're going home. Oh, so where are you coming from? You just want to sit there.
I thought it was the. I thought it was the.
I thought it was good. I did the opposite. I got that. Yeah, I was great.
To me, it's better. Just like it's more interesting to see.
My friend reported for it. She was so good. She's making accessible libraries. She's so cute. I know she is. Oh, she's in the window.
Anyway,
I know, right?
I bark.
I know.
I think I'm so funny.
No, you're not walking this way. No, guys, I literally just looked at you.
All right. So go ahead and pick this back up again. Should be recording. Cool. All right. So as I mentioned, this is going to be your free response for exam 2. Not these ranges. You need to know these ranges. Not all of them, but you need to know these ranges because they will not be provided to you on the exam. Okay. What your free response will be are going to be ABGs. Arterial, blood, gas analyses. So your free responses will be arterial, blood, gas analyses. In order to actually figure these out, you need to know 3 ranges. You need to know your pH range. As I mentioned before, this is your operational range. You should also probably know your ideal set point. What was the ideal set point? 7.40. I'm only adding the 0 because 3545. Okay. You need to know CO2, 35 to 45. And you need to know bicarbonate, 22 to 26. Okay. You need to know these values. They will not be provided to you in order to figure out your ABGs. Give
The ideal set value for
pH
everyone's?
for what?
Only just for pH.
Only pH has an ideal set point. Mhm. Great question. Okay. So this is my kind of step-by-step kind of process for ABGs. There are plenty of different ways to figure out ABGs. I recommend the tic-tac-toe method. Okay. So we'll follow this through and you'll get a feel for it. We got plenty of practice problems here. Oh, sorry.
So do we need to know the other 2 things are?
Nope. You do not need to know about oxygen or oxygen saturation.
Like it all.
You can scratch them out. Yeah, I'll scratch them out. Okay, those values, the ones in the red boxes, that's what you need to worry about. Okay. Now, when it comes to ABGs, this tic-tac-toe method is the method I like to use. If this method, you don't like it, that's fine. There's plenty of other YouTube options out there. but I like this one personally. Kind of works out the best. So when you guys start constructing your ABG statements, okay, these are going to be just listing out the different options. Okay, these are just all the different options. We have respiratory, or we have metabolic. Okay. Now it can be either acidosis or alkalosis. So you guys are familiar with this. It can be, one from each column. The new part for you guys is the compensation. Is it with full compensation? Is it with partial compensation? Or is it with no compensation? Okay. So what do I mean by this? On the exam, I'm going to give you some numbers. It will be your job to fill out the statement picking the correct parts. Okay, I'll show you guys examples here. I'm going to show you 3 numbers. You need to tell me respiratory, metabolic, acidosis, alkalosis, and then what level of compensation. With these questions, it's all or nothing. There are no partial points. This is how important this is to your nursing career. Okay, promise we're going to go through some examples, but I really want to relay to you guys important. Okay. All right, so this is what you can expect on the exam. 3 numbers, and I say go. Okay. So first thing we need to do. First thing, again, this is why you have a scrap sheet of paper. Always write down your ranges. Okay, so pH 7.35 to 7.45, with 7.40 being right in the middle. Agree? CO2. CO2 was 35 to 45. Now, CO2 is the tricky one. This is the tricky one. Why? Because you need to flip it. 45, 35. 45 to 35. Why on earth would we flip it? Let me kind of draw this out here. Bicarbonate stays the same. So I'm going to put a star next to CO2. 22 to 26. Why would we flip CO2? If you notice, everything on the left-hand side, if it's a low pH, is that acidic or basic? If I have high CO2, acidic or basic? Acidic. Low bicarb? Everything on the left is acidic. Everything on the right, basic. So you set this up as A for being acidic, N being neutral, B for being basic. Okay. Will these ranges be provided to you? No. Just make sure you just write them out a few times. Honestly, with the practice tonight, you'll have them down. Okay. Now we start sorting out values. So let's start with pH. pH is 7.3. Is 7.3 within operational range? No. Is it to the left or to the right? Therefore, does it belong in the acid column? Or yeah, there you go. So pH is going to go right into the acid. Okay. Now, if I had given you any of these numbers, it would be considered in range. If I give you 7.35, that would go in the neutral column. If I give you a CO2 of 45, that would go in the neutral column. It has to be out of range. Okay, we'll do a couple of examples here, but it has to be completely out. So if I give you, let's say I changed bicarbonate to 26. If bicarbonate was 26, which column would that go in? Neutral, okay? It has to be all the way outside. So 21, 27, okay, but 22 to 26, go right here. So CO2 here, remember, we flipped it. This is the tricky one. We flipped it. So where does 40 belong? Which column?
Basic.
40 is right in the middle between 35 and 45. Agreed? Therefore, it's neutral. 20, bicarbonate is 20. What would that be? So now is when you start producing your statement. I say we started with pH, we should start with pH again. pH is in which column? So am I in a state of acidosis or alkalosis? Okay, so we can start there. Okay. Now the question is, why am I acidic? Why am I acidic? What is pulling my pH into the acid column? What's pulling me into the same column? Your bicarbonate. Okay, so what I'm getting at is it's always attached to whatever's in the same column. If I am acidic, I literally say in my head, why am I acidic? What organ handles bicarbonate? Kidneys. So why am I acidic? What organ is failing? Kidneys. Therefore, I am in metabolic. Okay, so we have solved that we have metabolic acidosis. We are halfway there. Now we figure out compensation. My kidneys are failing, making me acidic. What are my lungs doing about it?
Well, they're not doing anything.
They're neutral. If my lungs cared about me, they'd try to even me out. This thing about like a teeter-totter, like a seesaw. I got two kids over here. This kid's sitting in the middle. Do they care? So what are your lungs doing? Are they helping you compensate? No. So this is with no compensation. Okay, with no compensation. So my kidneys are failing, making me acidic. If my lungs cared, they'd be trying to balance me out, but they're not. They're doing, and this is what I read in my head, they're doing nothing. Okay, promise we're gonna get plenty of practice with this here. Do we at least understand kind of how to start forming these here? Okay, so patient number 2. I'm just gonna write out the ranges. You guys don't need to because you already have them. Okay. Okay, so just setting it up here, okay? pH 7.3, we've already actually kind of seen this before. Where would pH go? Which column? I agree. It should be 7.3, should be right about, yeah. 30, where would 30 get sorted? Remember we flipped it? We flipped it. 30 is over there.
Yeah.
I agree. So it should be basic. Just saying, be careful with that CO2. Be careful. Because it goes 35 to 45, right? So it'd be 34, 33, 32. We flipped the number line
The
completely.
lower the CO2, the more basic it is. The higher the CO2, the more acidic it is. That's why we flipped it. Yes.
So-
CO2 is the only one that's good.
And wait, everything that's on the left is acidic. Everything on the right. Hmm?
How do we decide? Yeah, that's not when it's fully, yeah, compensating or partially compensating. What's our determining factor?
Going to get to it, promise. All right, next one, bicarbonate is 14. Where does that go? Okay, so first half of the statement you guys should have down pretty easily now. Is this person acidic or alkalotic? They're acidic. Why are they acidic? Go ahead.
Will those always be on the same side?
No. I'll give you some more examples, I promise. So acidosis, why am I acidic? Why am I acidic? What's attached to it? So it's metabolic, like kidneys. Okay, so this is very similar to patient number 1. Kidneys are failing, making me acidic. The difference here, though, my CO2 is no longer right here. It's on the other side. So there's compensation. My lungs are trying to balance me out. Now the question, is it partial or is it full compensation? Am I operational? Am I okay? Am I going to live with a pH of 7.3? My operational range is 7.35 to 7.45. No. My lungs are helping, but is it enough to keep me alive? Therefore, they're helping. There's some sort of compensation, but not enough.
So if it was technically 7.35, though, you said it was neutral.
Mhm.
So we will never have a full compensation then.
We'll get there. Okay, so 7.30. We agree that we're all acidic, yes? My lungs are helping me, but it's not enough to be operational. Yes.
If that was 7.35, then it would go in the end column. And then,
Great question. You guys asked the same question.
oh, sorry.
No, that's perfect. I'm just writing out the tension here.
So I'm gonna-
Okay. Now, the last one. Okay. So again, I'm just gonna write out the ranges. You guys don't need to worry about it if you don't want to. Okay. So, oh, that looks like a 6. That's not a 6. Okay. pH 7.37. Are we operational?
Yes.
Cool. We're good. But pH has something that every other range does not have. What does pH have that CO2 and bicarbonate don't have? The ideal set point of 7.4. This is why I keep writing it in here. If you are at 7.4, you are ideal, you are good. Is this person 7.4? So they're operational, but are they considered neutral? They are slightly. So how do we even depict this? This is what I personally do. Because we have an ideal set point, this person is technically less than 7.4. Agreed?
Yeah.
That means they are technically acidic, but they are operational. Okay. So CO2 is 30. That's basic. Bicarbonate, be acidic. So sorting it out here looks like that. So this is why we still put it in the acidic column. So you can actually read that statement. Because you read it just like you normally have been. I'm technically acidic. So what is going on here? If you like shortcuts, if I ever give you a pH, between 7.35 and 7.45, are they operational?
Yes. Yes.
So if I ever give you a pH within that range, you instantly know it's full compensation. If I give you something out of range, well, then it's either partial or no. And you need to look at the other ones. So let's, before I turn you guys loose here, let's go over some ground rules. So some never events. These are things I will never give you. A, I will never give you a pH of 7.40. I will never exactly say pH of 7.40. I might say 7.39. I might say 7.41, but I will never give you 7.40. Why?
It's not acidic or alkaline water.
Yeah, if there's nothing wrong with you, you guys have a 7.4 right now. Do we need to do an arterial blood gas analysis? They're fine. Okay, I will never give you 7.40. Other things, I will never do this to you. Okay, let's try to read this statement, like what's going on here. I'm acidic, but my kidneys are making me basic and my lungs are doing nothing. If my kidneys are making me basic, how the hell am I acidic? What I'm getting at is, notice how there's nothing attached to pH. If you sort this out and nothing shares the same column as pH, something got sorted wrong. Remember that CO2 is tricky. You got to flip it. So maybe CO2 got sorted wrong. There should always be something attached to pH. Okay. Another never event. If you sort them all out and they all end up in the same column. My kidneys are failing, making me basic, and my lungs are failing, making me basic. So this person has 2 organs failing right now. Are you really concerned about how they're compensating? That's multiple organ failure. We got bigger fish to fry. Okay, so never gonna give this to you either. Yeah. So ABGs, they will be on your exam too. I'm debating if I want them on your final exam too. Kind of leaning towards yes, because in foundations they come back up. But in order to help you guys practice, I have worksheets. Okay, now this is totally optional. I'm not going to collect this for points, but it would probably behoove you to do these, because tomorrow, before we start class, we're going to go through this worksheet. We're going to see if you know how to do this or not. Because again, this is going to be on your free response. Okay. Is there partial credit? Will you be given ranges? Okay. When you guys write it out, I sometimes shorthand it and I do this. I say like respiratory alkalosis with no comp. If you shorthand like that, that's fine. You don't have to write out respiratory. You don't have to write out metabolic. You don't have to write out compensation or with. As long as I know what you're talking about, we're good. And if you are still paranoid, you're like, oh, I still don't know. There's a website on the top of this worksheet here with additional problems with the answer. Okay. So if you want, I'll be hanging out here for a few minutes. If you want to get a jump start on this and ask me if you're doing it right, wrong, you're more welcome to. If not, I will see you guys tomorrow morning. I'll keep the light off just because if I flick it on everyone's. So, good job, guys, hanging in there. I will try to have this recording up ASAP. Do it.